If you've been in a car accident, you might be dealing with a damaged vehicle, physical pain, mounting medical bills, and the uncertainty of how long recovery will take. You need the insurance company to compensate you fairly so you're not left struggling with these. In this video, I'll reveal ways to potentially receive hundreds or even thousands of more dollars for your claim, simple tactics to outsmart the insurance company, and how to resolve your accident claim faster than you might expect. But first, you need to understand the initial steps an insurance company takes after your car or truck accident. Consider the true story of Felix. He was driving through a green light with his family in South Florida. A pickup truck from the other direction left-turned and crashed into his car. The airbags deployed and Felix's car was damaged. He had severe pain in his hand as well. The police officer gave Felix the crash report, which was great for 3 reasons. First, it can sometimes take the officer days or weeks or even months to complete the crash report. And second, often the officer just gives you a driver exchange of information form. The problem with that form is that it does not say how the crash happened, and it doesn't have a diagram of the accident. Those 2 pieces of information can be crucial in terms of understanding how the crash happened. The crash report stated that the other driver, Greg, told the officer he was in the left turn lane when he was hit. Fortunately, a witness had in-car video that showed that the left turn signal was not active before the crash. This meant that Felix had the right of way and the pickup truck cut him off. There was another piece of good news on the crash report. It said that Geico insured the other driver, which was a good start, because sometimes the report won't list an insurance company, or other times it lists an insurance company who have reputations for being tougher than Geico. I'm talking about companies like Progressive, Allstate, State Farm, and many others. But just because the crash report lists insurance for the other driver, it doesn't mean that they have coverage. To have coverage, 3 things need to happen. They need to have an active policy, meaning that they paid their insurance bill. The vehicle they're driving needs to be listed on the policy, and the driver needs to be listed on the policy in some instances. Felix had a potential huge issue. Felix only had the minimum required insurance on his car. This meant that he didn't have collision coverage, which would pay to fix Felix's car. And Felix's car was a total loss, and he owed the bank over $50,000 on it. This meant that he now needed the other driver to have property damage liability coverage. That's the other driver's liability coverage that pays for damage to your car and other property. But most vehicles are required to have just a low limit in property damage liability coverage. Florida requires just $10,000 for most cars. To make matters worse, the other driver, Greg, was driving an old pickup truck. Often, people driving old vehicles have no insurance or low insurance on it. So let's assume that Greg's truck had valid insurance coverage, but he only had the $10,000 minimum limits. In this instance, Felix would take a $40,000 loss on his car. This is because Geico would only cover $10,000 of the $50,000 in damages to Felix's car. The stakes were huge. Surprisingly, Felix had gap coverage on his car. That pays the difference between the loan value and the value of your damaged car. But he still needed Greg to have a big property damage coverage limit. Felix's car was undrivable, so he didn't have a car to get around. Unfortunately, Felix didn't have rental car coverage on his own car. This meant that his only chance at getting Geico, Greg's insurance company, to pay for his rental car and the damage to his car is if Greg's policy had a large property damage limit. That's because the other driver's property damage liability coverage pays for both fixing your car and paying for a rental car. But all that money comes from the same limit. Once that limit is used up, the insurance company won't pay any more. Basically, we needed the Geico property damage limit to be enough to pay for both Felix's car and the rental car. But it gets worse. Felix also broke his wrist in the crash, and at the ER, the doctor wanted to operate on it. He has a young child, so lifting her was an issue with a badly broken wrist. Geico had left a voice message with Felix asking him to call. This was good because it meant that Greg had reported the accident to Geico and a claim had been set up. The insurance company can't pay you until a claim is set up, and sometimes the other driver gives the police officer an old insurance card. And you may set up a claim with the wrong insurance company, which can cause huge delays in you getting paid. So it was great that Geico had a claim set up. Felix was overwhelmed with the claim process and wanted to make sure his rights were protected. So he called my office, we spoke, and he hired me. I immediately spoke with Geico and asked the adjuster 3 questions. You should ask these questions even if you don't have a lawyer or even if you're an attorney. The first question that I asked is there coverage for this claim? The Geico adjuster told me that there was coverage, which was great, because sometimes they'll tell you that the vehicle isn't on the policy and they won't provide insurance coverage. The second question I asked was, what were the property damage and bodily injury liability limits? Geico told me that the policy had $50,000 in property damage liability coverage and $100,000 per person in bodily injury liability coverage. I was grateful that the policy had $50,000 in property damage coverage because it could have only had $10,000 to $40,000. And Felix would owe a ton of money on his car loan that Geico wouldn't owe him. And I was happy that Geico had $100,000 in bodily injury liability coverage. It's called BI coverage. This is good news because most cars aren't required to have any BI coverage in Florida. That pays for your pain and suffering, medical bills, and lost wages if the other driver was careless. But Felix learned he'd need the surgeon to put a plate and screws in his wrist. Jury verdicts put the full value of pain and suffering for a broken wrist with that surgery between $200,000 and $300,000. But this doesn't mean that Geico will pay you this amount even if they have BI coverage. Car insurance companies fight claims hard, and they often make you a low first offer, if they make an offer at all. So I hope that Geico's BI limit would have been at least $225,000, but ideally more. The third question I asked the Geico claims rep was, have you accepted liability for the crash? The adjuster told me that they were still investigating it. Now you may say, but the other driver got a ticket. They're clearly at fault. Geico should accept liability. You're partially correct, but you're somewhat wrong. I'll explain. Insurance companies do look at the car accident report in your case. So it's a good start if the officer gives the other driver a ticket for a moving violation like careless driving or failure to yield right of way. But it's not the only thing that they consider. They place a huge emphasis on speaking with the driver of their insured's vehicle. Here's why. Sometimes that driver will have a different version of the accident than what the police officer wrote down. This can substantially affect how much the insurance company owes you. They only owe you in proportion to their driver's percentage of fault. For example, if their driver is only 75% at fault, their insurance company only owes you for 75% of your claim. This percentage rule applies to both your property damage and bodily injury claim. If we assume that the value of Felix's car damage is $50,000, then 75% of that is $37,500. Even though the property damage liability limit is $50,000, Geico would only owe Felix $37,500. That's assuming that Geico's insured driver was 75% at fault. That would save Geico $12,500, which is a lot of money, and that's just on Felix's property damage claim. I was just using the 75% to show you how the rule works. I believe that Greg was 100% at fault. My 19 years of settling millions of dollars of car accident claims has taught me the following. Insurance companies love to save money. Even huge insurance companies like Geico, Progressive, and State Farm will want to speak with the driver of their insured's vehicle or the company owner before they pay for the damage to your car or pay for a rental car even if you don't rent one. This can be very frustrating if you don't have collision coverage on your car like Felix, but it can also be frustrating even if you have collision coverage but you have a deductible. A deductible is the amount that you must pay before your insurance company has to pay. And it's even more bothersome if you don't have rental car coverage on your car because you're at the mercy of the other driver's insurance company to complete their investigation, and you'll likely feel helpless. Waiting for an insurance company payout can feel endless, like watching a pot that never boils. I got Geico to pay the $50,000 property damage limits to the bank who held the car loan, but we didn't stop there. We got Geico to allow Felix to keep the title to the car. In a moment, you'll see how this was game-changing for him. Felix also made a claim with his Gap insurance company. They paid the difference between what Geico paid and the amount that Felix owed on the car. So Felix's credit score wasn't affected and his car was paid off. Felix then sold his car for a whopping $10,000 or so to a scrap company. But that was only because I got Geico to let him keep the title to the car. So rather than losing money on his totaled car, he made a large profit. Felix got a second opinion on his broken wrist and decided not to have surgery. He also had back pain and neck pain. Felix had health insurance that paid a large amount of his medical bills, and they demanded to be paid from any personal injury settlement with Geico. I convinced them to drop their claim, which was great for Felix. I also had the other driver complete forms providing his financial information. This helped us decide if it was worth suing for more than his $100,000 BI limit. In a different recent case, I got the careless driver to offer $15,000 in addition to his $100,000 insurance policy. Unfortunately, Felix wasn't so lucky. We also needed to be sure that if we settled the case with Geico, the settlement release would have language that would let Felix continue to use his health insurance. I quickly sent Felix's medical records and bills to Geico. All your accident-related medical records are important, but if you're in a bad crash, there's one that's usually the most important, and it's the operative report, which is also called the surgery report. If you have surgery, you should get the operative report as soon as possible after your surgery. Quickly review it and then send it to the careless driver's insurance company. Since Felix didn't have surgery, the most important record in his case was the one that said he had a broken wrist and the doctor recommended surgery. I quickly sent it to Geico, and you should do the same in your case. In Felix's case, I convinced Geico to pay us the $100,000 bodily injury liability limits, and Geico agreed to use my settlement release language, which was fantastic. This let Felix continue to use his health insurance for his accident-related injuries. He was thrilled. What I didn't tell you is that I used a simple claim trick to put pressure on Geico to pay fast. I reveal what that proven tactic is in the video that's on screen now and linked in the description below, so watch it now. And if you've been injured in a car accident in Florida and someone else is at fault, click the link in the description below to see if I could be the lawyer for you.